Michael's spawned fear in people because they didn't know what Michael was thinking. Where Fredo was the exact opposite. You perceived you know who Fredo was because of how out loud Fredo lived and how much he emoted.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Fast Forward podcast. We are at the end of season 3. I actually cannot even believe it. I'm excited about everything that we've talked about, but I know that the final topic that I picked to close out the year is privilege versus influence. Of course, we talked about Sanaa Lathan's character Sid on Brown Sugar for the last Out of Scope episode, but I have wanted to do a character from one of my favorite movies for a while, and I figured that there was no better time to talk about this character than conversations around privilege and influence, because this character is way too privileged and has way too little influence. But we'll get into that. So, of course, you know, the Out of Scope segment is designed to share with us the nuggets of wisdom on leadership from unconventional leaders, aka villains in TV and movies. And this character is probably one of the most well-known villains in film history, and that is none other than Fredo Corleone from the Godfather series. So Fredo is the second oldest brother of Michael Corleone. He is the second child of Vito, and he is the odd child out. And that's for a number of reasons. Now, to give you some context, we're going to be talking about Fredo's character from the perspective of the film. So if you are a person who has read the book, I know that there is much more color and dimension added to his character and much more backstory. But we are going to take Mr. Fredo as he was presented in the film. All right. I have a guest with me today. This is actually the first time that I've had a guest on the Out of Scope segment. So I'm actually really excited about this because, especially when you're talking about characters, everybody sees people in a different way. So I'm excited to hear the perspective of someone else who I trust and think is a brilliant leader. And that is Dion Ferrell. Dion, please introduce yourself to us, tell us about you, and give us a fun fact.
Absolutely. Kaylin, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm so excited to be here with you today. As mentioned, I'm Dion Ferrell, CEO of the United Alliance. We are a business that believes in rebuilding community. We use business as a means to rebuild community. We believe communities are the fuel for society. And by incorporating business, business provides the resources needed to influence change. So that's really important to us and my colleagues. The company was started 4 years ago. Really excited, based here in Atlanta. You know, I'm from Southeast Michigan. What up, though? So happy to be here with you. It was amazing how we met. Fun fact about me, I'll give two fun facts. The
All right.
first,
I'm with you. Here we go.
I'm giving you two. So the first one is I'm 6'6". All right. So played sports and all of that. Coming up, you're always asked, do you play basketball? Okay. So I did play basketball, but I was so tired of that question. So my response to people was, no, I write poetry under the moonlight. Okay. Now, so I would say it jokingly, but I was serious about that. I am a poet. I love to write. And so I write poetry. But that was a way to show people the other dimension of I'm not just a jock. I'm not just an athlete. I am a scholar and I love the arts as well. So I'm a right brain, left brain type of person. The second fun fact, my professional career has been rooted in change and transformation. I love it. That goes back to upbringing in childhood. I've had to deal with a lot of change, a lot of growth, a lot of transformation. So that's vitally important to who I am as an individual, as well as my story. Well, I say in a personal vein, I have 5 children, okay? And I said I didn't have enough friends to play with, so I have 5 kids. So I'm a big kid with my babies. My oldest is 20, my youngest is 13, but I tell them all the time they're still my babies, but I needed more friends to play with, so I have 5 babies. So those are my 2 fun facts.
First of all, so much to pull out of that, but let's back up for a second. That story about height in basketball, I had a coworker, and he was really tall. He played basketball in high school and college. Actually, his 2 sons did too. And he used to get the same question all the time from our clients, and he would get so tired of it all the time. So I completely empathize with that. He used to look like he had a migraine when everybody would ask him that. But I want to hear more about this poetry. So, do you have a particular style of poetry that you love? Is there like just like openness in terms of the genres and the types that you like?
There's complete openness. It's I use it as a creative outlet. I've allowed a few folks to read it over the years. I don't do it for mass publication. I do it more so to express myself, to vent, to share. I've had a few friends tell me I should be a ghostwriter, so to speak, because I've really fought this notion of being in the forefront, you know. And again, I don't do it to necessarily share, but I must say it's really good poetry. So, but it spans a very various topics. It really deals with where I'm at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
things I'm going through, how I would like to emote, and just share truth. As a man and as a
Yeah,
black man, it's really important that we have outlets to express ourselves. Oftentimes, we know women are touted as emotional, but men have emotions too, and that
sure.
doesn't stop you from being a real man. So having an outlet to share, to open up, to express myself, my feelings have been vitally important throughout my life.
I love that, especially as a contrast to the work that you do. So I love the arts as well. That's probably why I'm asking all of these questions about it because I am an arts lover. I'm a writer as well. I grew up as a musician, a singer, like love all of it. And exactly what you said, it helps so much to balance out all of the analytical work that we have to do in
Yes.
change management. And so you can easily burn out. And it's funny, I tell my clients that I'm like, if you work a very physical job, you need creative work, you need things that balance out the physicality. If you have a deeply intellectual or emotional line of work, like therapists, again, type of work we do as consultants, you have to get into that balance with that. So if it's deeply emotional, do some stuff that's intellectual, puzzles or physical stuff. That's part of why I cook a lot because cooking gives me a release and a relaxation for my brain and my emotions where I'm just doing stuff with my hands. I'm touching food, I'm chopping things, I'm stirring the pot. And so that gives me a chance to relax and let those things rest. So I love that you found an outlet for that. I think that's really smart. And I feel like a lot of men struggle with that. That actually ties into Fredo because um Fredo has a problem with being the softer side of emotion in a family that prioritizes logic and explosive anger. So if we think about like Sonny's character, where I mean, Sonny gonna fly off the handle, like
Fast.
he fast and loves it too, which was part of his demise. Michael is admittedly almost completely detached and cold. That leadership is needed as well, but we're going to get to that later. But Fredo is joyful, playful. He is excited. He is, as Connie described him, because Connie is the fourth child, the girl. He's innocent. He's soft, right? But that's a dimension. So if we were to think of all of the children in the Corleone family as dimensions of a personality, right? You have the intellectual side, the emotional side, almost like the spiritual side, and you have the physical side. They all embody parts of that. But the problem is that the environment around them pretty much require Michael's leadership, and that becomes very clear over time. And so Fredo gets left out. So I love that you brought up how hard you had to work to find balance. as a man, because I don't think that that's easy, and I don't think that's always celebrated, but it is needed, very much
For
so
sure.
needed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when I think about basketball, when I played basketball, I would refer to it as poetry in motion.
Mm,
So even playing the game of basketball, and I ran track, I played football, I used to play baseball, so I love sports. But
clearly.
but basketball was my sanctuary, and I referred to it as poetry in motion. So the movements when you're in a zone, it's almost musical, right? There's a rhythm to it. And so I mean, I that's a whole different conversation, but like there's a rhythm of dribbling the ball. There's a sound that it makes and the wood makes and the gym makes. And so it's almost a symphony when you see great players play and orchestrate things. And so music, arts, poetry, sports, all of that fuses together for me.
Yeah, that made me happy. I smiled big because exactly what you said about a symphony is so true. It brought back a flood of memories from being in orchestra and band when I was a kid in high school, especially because I was in like 5 performing groups because everybody did a little bit of everything in band. If you was in one, you had to find something to do in the others. And so the symphony was just like that. That one person could be playing all whole notes because that was their part, but those whole notes were so important to it, not just the melody part, right? Or not just the accent notes that you might play. And so even now, when I do my work, and you and I have talked about system design and systems thinking, that there's no part that's not important. And that when you get into that zone and that flow, and you are just like doing what you need to do for the part you need to play, the level of harmony that is created is just it's immeasurable. So yes, thank you for that. I can spend all day talking about the art and music, even
For
basketball.
sure.
Basketball is the only sport that I watch on TV. That's like the only one that I really like. And so I even love basketball too. But anyway, all right, let's talk about Fredo and his crazy tail self. Because the thing is that when I was first ideating on how I wanted to approach Fredo, I had to catch myself from being from thinking of him in a bad light because I had to remember, like, no, the point is to bring out the leadership nugget. So I had to rewrite the questions. I want to say about 3 times. And I was thinking about the fact that Fredo had some unappreciated leadership qualities that even if he was not the chief of the operation, they could have been incredibly helpful. But the first thing that I want to bring up is that for Fredo, he is navigating his career and his family life based on a sense of entitlement that because he is older than Michael, he should automatically come first instead of paying attention to what is needed for the family to survive and thrive in that moment. My question to you is, how could Fredo have better prepared for what was clearly going to be a transition of power to Michael rather than him?
So great question. The first thing, I'm not sure that it was clear to Fredo that there would be a transition. If we think about how Sonny was murdered, no one was really expecting that to happen when it happened.
Mm,
Part of the challenge of leadership is we don't always know when the baton is going to pass to us, which is why preparation is so vital and important because we don't know when the moment is going to present itself.
mm,
With that being said, Fredo lived too much via his emotion. Fredo, as a character, appeared to be an individual that did what felt good, what he wanted to do. He lived out of comfort, and the comfort was him emoting and having fun. The
mm.
the interesting thing is I would be more synonymous with a Michael type character. I'm a goofball. I like having fun, but I have a very stoic face. I
Yes,
don't,
you do. I would.
you know,
That's why I laugh. 'Cause I'm like,
a very stoic face. So people tell me I'm always looking serious. Now I'm a deep thinker. I am a deep thinker. but I
Okay.
love having fun. I love being silly. But nevertheless, Fredo, I don't believe he really took his role seriously. And as you
Mm.
mentioned about entitlement, because he was the oldest, he expected if there was ever a transition that naturally it would be him because of his birth order. The problem with
Uh,
entitlement is when you feel entitled, you don't prepare.
oh, whoa, wait a minute.
Come
Oh,
on in, come on in. I hear you. I hear
right.
you.
Whoa, wait a minute. No, because that's extremely important. Because hold on, let me back because you just said like three things. And I was like, don't overtalk, don't overtalk. Because I be getting hype. Okay, so let's back up because let's use the last thing that you said as the umbrella for the other things you said. Because everybody knew that Sonny was gonna be first in line because Sonny is the oldest. But to your point, he still should have been preparing to be smarter, even about how he potentially could support Sonny, because then he would have been next. But because he felt entitled really to be the jokester or the goofball of the family, no, he didn't feel it necessary to prepare. Because even when their father was attacked, he just literally fumbled the weapon. Like he could have been protecting the father. He could have been doing anything. He just felt like he was never paying attention. And my thing is that, okay, you know your father, or you should know that your father just made some people mad or just turned down something. You not looking around when y'all walking outside. You not paying attention. Like he was completely oblivious. And so, yeah, you are absolutely right. Like entitlement does undermine the opportunity for preparation because you assume that your identity itself is preparation, not the work needed to
Oh,
prepare.
that's so good. That is so good.
Yeah, this got me thinking about a lot of things. Okay. Because my thing too is if you feel entitled to a title, because that's a part of it too. If you feel entitled to a title or to a role, you don't even pay attention to how your predecessor functions. Like he never paid attention to the way that his father handled security, the way his father negotiated, the way his father dealt with the children. Like he wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was just sitting there. Based on the movie, the only person that actually, even Sonny didn't. Now that I think about it, to be honest, the only person who was attentive and genuinely preparing was Michael. Wait a
Think
minute.
about the scene when they were celebrating Vito's birthday,
Yeah.
and Michael had just dropped the news to his siblings that he was going into the Marines. Everyone else got up from the table and ran to celebrate. Michael stayed at the table. And I know we're talking about Fredo, so I don't want to go off too
No, but I
far.
think that, no, but this is important. Yeah.
He didn't do what he was expected to do, but you could see he was reasoning on why he didn't follow suit with his other siblings.
Hmm.
It was the character and the desire to lead and stand alone
Mm.
that showed evidence of his preparation, which is not surprising why Vito recognized that and appointed him to be the heir of the dynasty, the family, the
Yeah.
mafia,
Yeah.
to be the next Don.
So what's interesting about that is because even when Sonny was the heir before his untimely passing, the expectation was that Michael would lead the family in another way. That he would be this businessman, this politician. And he and Vito talked about this. He was like, hey, I figured you would be a senator or a governor or somebody like that. And that too is a form of leadership because political allies and political presence is a benefit to any organization and group. Let me let the audience know. Let me circle that for a minute. You cannot get anything done without leveraging and building political power, influence, and privilege. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how gifted you are. I don't care if you got all of the right accolades. I don't care if you next in line based on tenure, birth order, looks, whatever. If you do not understand and know how to leverage political power, influence, and privilege, you are going nowhere fast. Now back to the conversation. But he recognized that, like, yeah, we got this like hardcore mob side, that this is still happening because we got all the families and we have this organization as the mafia. So that is like macro level. But Vito also had a vision for the family as a micro level organization. And that seems to always have been Michael's territory. That like our legit side, the front face of who we are, I've prepared you to own that because you got sent to, I think, with the Dartmouth. So it's like you got this Ivy League education. Now you're coming back, you're a war hero and all of these things. I mean, it's like all the pieces have aligned to make sure, especially at that time, so we talking about 40s, 50s, you set up for success in the legit world.
Right.
And then all of that got upended.
If I may interject a little bit more on
No, please go ahead, because you see, I'm processing. I'm processing this.
So the entitlement side of things, entitlement also negates responsibility. We talked about lack of preparedness, but we also must talk about responsibility. If you don't see responsibility, you will never prepare. Fredo was living on the fruits and the spoils of his family and what his family name represented. And so he was in the trappings of the life. He got caught up in the life, the lifestyle, and what it brought. Fredo was not focused on what he could bring back to the family, whether in good times or bad, but especially we saw it in times of crises. And because of his lack of preparedness and responsibility, the one thing that his brothers definitely didn't appreciate via his character was the emotional outburst and the immaturity that he displayed when he did not get his way.
I could totally see that, because in that regard, it's like we let you sit here and be a kid for all of this time anyway, and now you can't even control yourself in this one moment. Like, what's up?
For sure.
And it's interesting because, so another aspect I wanted to talk about is the fact that, Fredo did have some gifts and talents that could have been used, but based off of what you just said, now I can understand why Michael couldn't even appreciate those. Because one thing that Fredo was very gifted at is allowing people to see him as a lamb, even when he was being a lion. So no one would ever have expected him to be able to orchestrate the plot with like Hyman Roth and Johnny Ola and all of those people, because it's like, this Fredo, he ain't doing nothing. Like, he just play all the time. But that low key was some diabolical work. Like, that was some slick stuff.
Right.
And I think he was able to orchestrate that because people just assume, oh, it's just Fredo. He just play all day. I feel like, now that I'm remembering those scenes, I feel like that could have even been what hurt Michael the most. Because it's like, if you had all of this capacity, why you may be using that to help us? Like, now you want to be smart? Now you want to get your man right and put it to use? But against me? Like, not even to the depth of you tried my life. Yeah, that's one aspect. But the fact that you were this intelligent and strategic and, you did all of this work, but you ain't putting none of that into what's going on with the family? Why not? Like, what's up?
You're knocking on a door. The door that you're knocking on, entitlement breeds selfishness. Fredo, to the point that you raised, it wasn't that Fredo didn't have emotional intelligence or capacity. We saw evidence of it as you just depicted. However, Fredo only used it to serve him.
Wow.
And that was a very selfish act. Not only was it an attempt on Michael's life and his wife or his family,
Yeah.
it was also the matter of Vito did this for the family. Michael's doing this for the family. How
Yep.
is it that you can't take responsibility, that word again, for the family beyond yourself?
That's a good because even I mean, at that point, he's putting his wife in danger with a lot of this stuff. Like he's not thinking of anybody but himself. I don't think I even thought about that part. And it's funny because Fredo's capacity to plan was based only on, at best, the second degree consequence. So I've mentioned on the podcast before how when you're planning, you have to think of the third, fourth, and fifth degree consequence. So I don't know if you call it like a mantra or like my, key thought statement for my life, but I focus on legacy. 4 generations back, 4 generations ahead. So everything that I'm planning in my life right now, every single aspect of my life is designed to make sure that my great grandchildren can be straight and that they are set to be able to thrive and to reconcile both the dreams and the generational curses, overcome those of the 4 generations before me. And so that 4 and 4 lens helps me to make better decisions. It helps me to prioritize certain relationships. It helps me to dismiss certain relationships. It helps me to make better choices in everything from real estate to jewelry to career to where I live and in terms of like city and state. Like all of those things are part of that lens. But when you think about somebody who is as entitled and then as childish as a Fredo, you thinking, oh, I want to be in charge because this is what should have happened. So you're going 1 degree behind and present, not thinking of everything that had to happen for the last 2, 3 generations to get us to this point and what is being set up for 3, 4 generations ahead. And that narrow lens, it really distorts decision making because if you with other people who are also thinking as narrow as you is cool, but when you around folks who thinking long term, which all of these players in this story were, yeah, you gonna run into some trouble because they gonna play you like a fiddle every time.
For sure. Think about the locations of where Fredo was as
Mm.
they got older. He was in
Mm.
Nevada,
Mm-hmm.
gambling, parties, Miami. He he showed up to Cuba. He was in all the party spots. So Fredo showed up to turn up. But Fredo didn't show up to strategize on how do we maneuver. So
I'm laughing because he did. Like when I tell you Fredo was always down for a good time, like he was never gonna miss a party.
Fredo said, "How do you say banana pina colada?" When he's in Cuba, right? And I think Michael had a club soda, but again in that space, where was Fredo demonstrating a clear head? To the point
Mm.
they could have leveraged that for the family because
Mm-hmm.
he was so unassuming. He was so harmless or perceived as harmless. That's just
Yes.
Fredo. Fredo likes to have fun. Fredo has a lot of friends. He makes deep connections. So Fredo could get in rooms
Yes,
that
he could.
Michael could not because of his personality and how he moved and how he just demonstrated his personality.
Yeah.
Michael was
Yes.
calculated and Michael spawned fear in people because they didn't know what Michael was thinking. Where
Mm.
Fredo was the exact opposite. You perceived you knew who Fredo was because of how out loud Fredo lived and how much he emoted.
You know what that makes me think? So then for you, what do you think made Sonny's outbursts redeemable versus Fredo's? Because technically Sonny and Fredo both had emotional leadership styles when compared to Michael's
For sure.
very logical leadership style. But we never like we don't go in on Sonny the way we went in on Fredo. And it's not just because, obviously Sonny had a tragic demise. Like people generally like Sonny. People mess with Sonny, like that's they do. Folks don't mess with Fredo. So why do you think that is?
We saw evidence of Sonny's strategy still. Sonny's problem is
Mm.
he was very hot-headed and
Gotcha.
impulsive, but it wasn't that in calm moments that Sonny didn't think. that Sonny didn't maneuver, and Sonny also shared his thoughts. So you could get into his mind, you could understand why he's doing certain things. Now, if you cross Sonny, Sonny's turning up immediately. He's not asking
Immediately.
questions, and that's what happened to his death, right? Sonny popped off, and he
Imme
didn't think about the consequences.
Can we just back up on that? Like, let me tell you something. As somebody who is very decisive myself, like, I could respect how Sonny moved, but I am not as emotionally explosive as Sonny for a lot of reasons. The way Sonny used to be popping off, like, what? That's a lot going on. Like, it was like he ain't have to do no processing. It was like this happened, boom. He was moving at the speed of light. That's a lot. I
Well,
just had to say that. That was a lot.
and Sonny garnered respect and fear
Mm,
because of the unpredictability of his actions.
mm.
People didn't fear Fredo.
No, nope,
No
nope.
one feared Fredo. Part of, I believe, what happened with Michael and Michael's disappointment, he underestimated Fredo.
So it really was anger at himself too, where it's just like, now why I couldn't expect. Oh, okay. And you know what's funny about that? Huh. I think I said this on the podcast before too. Fear is a powerful motivator.
Oh, shit.
I did.
Absolutely.
I did. It was in the Miranda episode about the Devil Wears Prada. Like, listen, I mess with fear. Like, I don't mad people being a little bit scared of me. I don't necessarily want you to not deal with me because you so scared. But it's kind of cool when people have to think twice before they pull something.
For
For
sure.
real.
For
Like,
sure.
when people feel like they could just try it, they listen, folks a clown. When they think like, hold on, if I do that, Dion might do this. Well, if the hold on, if I say that, Kaylin might. Yes, exactly. Check yourself, literally, before you wreck yourself. Like I'm with
Fact.
fear. That is an important emotion, and it's funny because people were motivated by people were motivated to respond in certain ways by fear of Sonny because Sonny also had a sense of nobility, right? Like he clearly violated the covenants of his marriage. We saw that many times in the film. And the father clearly did not like that. But as far as it's like the battle between micro and macro. So his micro nuclear family, he didn't quite respect a whole lot. But the macro family of the Corleone dynasty, he respected that very much and knew the importance of maintaining that structure, that system, that prestige, that prominence. And I think that battle, Fredo didn't have respect for anything on a macro level.
Not
It
at
was
all.
all micro, which is like him. Huh, okay.
Fredo was the middle son.
Uh-huh.
He got lost in being the middle child, the middle son.
Mm,
We saw even when they went back to Sicily, Vito was holding Michael. So the oldest, Sonny, was invested in. He could see his dad's movements. He could understand. Michael was on the bookend of it. Fredo just kind of got lost in the middle, got
yeah, he
lost in
did.
the sauce.
Yeah. And I know he grew up as a sickly child too.
Right.
So I think, and the book talks a little bit more about that. I think the book either alludes to or flat out says that he had brain damage from having pneumonia as a child or something like that. And in the movie, you see the scene where they're trying to do like healing techniques on him, but I think he really did have some lasting impact of that. But even beyond that, he still had a character that said, listen, like, I'm just here for a good time. Like we said, like, I'm just turning up. It's interesting because the type of family structure that Michael was building and developing, Fredo would have had an important place there. So when they sent him to Las Vegas because they were building all the casinos and stuff, he could have thrived there. Like
Yes.
that could have been his thing. But instead of him taking the leadership role, he mimicked the role that he already played in the family, which is I just play all the time and somebody else is going to take care of me. So, my challenge to the listeners is to understand your positioning has to be dynamic in order to maintain your influence. If you are able to be taken care of, catered to, coddled in your family structure, don't assume that you're going to be able to take that same role at work. If you are typically the strong friend and you have to lead everybody else and make all the decisions, don't assume that that's going to have to be like that in your romantic relationships. If you are the person, seriously, like this is real because I think a lot of us, we want to be like one way because it's exhausting to have to pivot all the time. But if you are not prepared for the level of dynamism that is needed to thrive across the areas of your life, you're going to struggle a lot, a whole lot.
You took me several places there. I would like to interject two things, two thoughts. The first thought is for leaders to thrive. Everyone talks about IQ as a given. Everyone talks about EQ, emotional intelligence as a given. Not enough emphasis is put on AQ, the adversity quotient.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with leaders that are overly emotional is they fail miserably when adversity strikes. And if you think about Vito and the leader that he was, when Fentucci initially threatened him and his partners,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't act like Sonny or Fredo. He didn't respond in the moment. He plotted, he strategically calculated, and he took action, definitive action, but it was planned definitive action
Yes.
to rid themselves of the problem.
And to solve the root issue, right?
Correct.
So if he had snapped off in that moment, it would have been like, oh, I feel good because I just told him. But the problem is still there. The problem is this Don, this neighborhood Don. No, I need to get him out the way completely because if I get him out the way completely, not only will I be able to get him off of our neck, but I'm also going to be able to create space to thrive in what I'm creating and building. And it was funny too because he did it in such a way that didn't instill detrimental fear in other people.
Right.
He did it in such a way that actually drew people to him as a problem solver, as a supporter, as a connector, as a protector. And that is what the neighborhood needed in that moment. Because again, we think macro versus micro. So this is this small Italian immigrant community in New York. But the larger landscape of what is happening is that there was a very real threat, right? So I think sometimes we forget that a lot of the groups that are considered white now at one point were considered, not desirable, right?
Right.
Because they were immigrants to this country. And so there was a very real threat, a very real um detrimental view and perspective of their community when you think of the larger landscape in New York and in this country at that time. So there was a clear need for leadership in the micro aspect of their community, but he saw the potential to build macro level power if they could leverage having the right leader, which was him in Vito.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then the second thought was you talked about this notion of dynamic nature of leaders and
Mm-hmm.
personalities and being able to morph into different roles based upon the nature of the relationship you're in. Oftentimes, the problem is the way we identify ourselves. We
Yeah.
identify with what we do, not who we are. And when you confuse the two of those, you then try to play the same what in every circumstance. And that's a recipe for disaster of any relationship, because you
Yes.
might be the guy in this forum, but you need to be humble enough to be honest and real enough to say, when it comes to leading this family, that is not my role. That doesn't mean I don't have a vital role, but taking care of 4 generations behind and honoring 4 generations that came ahead, I'm not the person for that.
Mhm.
And when you define yourself by what, the what for Fredo was his birthright, being the second oldest son, being the
Right.
elder brother. So he saw that what versus focusing on developing who and his identity and who he is versus what he did and where
Mhm.
he ranked. And so oftentimes when people really fail in relationships, they try to maintain their role. If you think about traditional family values of
Mhm.
men being the head of the household, again,
Mhm.
whether you agree with it or not, well, what do you do in a situation where a woman is the senior stakes personal leader at work?
Right.
She's used to calling the shots.
Mhm.
That might not work at home.
Come
You
on.
know, even if her husband or significant other is in a lesser role in his workplace, if she
Right.
tries to come home with that same energy,
Right.
Houston, we got a problem. You know
Right.
what I mean?
And it's funny because you saying that is important because it is exhausting to you. This is what we was talking about balancing the ways that you have to show up even in your life. That is exhausting to have to be the leader all the time. That you have to be this same person all the time. That you have to be this one way all the time. How do you create a sense of balance and safe spaces? And if Fredo had been more strategic, he could have worked it to where it's like, yeah, y'all gave me the opportunity to be the front runner in Vegas before we moved the whole family out here. Now I could go back to kicking it and doing me because my brother coming. Like, all right, cool, do you. Like, all I want to do was play in the beginning. Like,
For
that's
sure.
it. Wow. Yeah, this got me thinking.
But as you talk about the exhausting nature of being the same, and I agree with you, however, people would settle being exhausted for control and predictability,
Come on.
because when you have to be dynamic, you have to grow capacity.
Mm,
And you're going to display things that you're not comfortable in or you're not well versed
mm,
in order for you to be dynamic. That requires a level of truth, transparency, vulnerability, realness, and
mhm.
knowing self. So self-awareness is
Yes.
rooted in that. Most leaders, and the reason that we struggle, Fredo struggled in the movie, but even current day, we have a void of leadership is because there's an absence of self-awareness.
Come on.
Leaders don't want to be vulnerable and recognize I'm strong here, but I'm not strong here. Therefore, I don't need to call the shots in the areas that Kaylin is stronger. I need to rely on Kaylin. But again, if I'm not aware of myself, if I'm not honest enough inside of me, I'll never
Mhm.
give you the opportunity to shine. What I'm going to do is keep you depressed and down. And again, I
So
talk
I
about
always feel up.
absolutely in
Mhm.
a corporate space, I had realized, back to change and transformation, I started studying, why do people resist change?
Mm,
And one of the reasons that I found was they didn't want their reference to change.
mm,
They weren't fighting against you. They weren't even fighting against the change in and of itself. They knew one way to operate.
mm.
And if you change their reference point, so back to what we were saying, if I'm used to being the man and now you bring me into a different environment, my reference point changed. I don't have confidence in self that I can figure it out. So even though I'm exhausted, I gotta keep this front up to be the same way in this new environment. because I don't have the emotional dexterity to figure something else out.
I want to yell out church phrases so bad when you said
Let's get it. Let the saints say amen.
because no, what you saying is so true on so many different levels. I have seen this in relationships, in my own relationships. I have seen this in work settings. I see this with my coaching clients. So especially when we were experiencing all of the events of 2020 and leaders had to rethink what leadership meant, one of the first questions that I would ask leaders in strategic planning and coaching sessions is, what does your ego need to be okay? And they would be
Woo,
thrown on.
woo.
What you mean? No, no, I want no, no. What does your ego need to be okay? Because if we go through all of the rigmarole to have people tell their deepest, darkest secrets and all the things they want to happen and all the things happen to them, and then you push back because you really didn't want to lose money, that's gonna blow up everything, waste everybody's time, and folks gonna start quitting in droves. So what does your ego need to be okay? And they'll be like, well, you know what? I don't like when I have to sit, in the happy hours or when I have to go on the golf course with my peers and their companies are performing better financially than mine. Thank you so much. So what you really care about is that the company does not lose too much or any money. Preferably you want to make some money. Yeah. Thank you so much. So now I know. I don't have to tell nobody that. I ain't got to, let everybody know I saw your slip showing, but I can make sure that I'm setting it up so that you gonna still look really good and the company not gonna lose money so that you could stay focused and emotionally grounded long enough for us to get some stuff done that these hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people need. And that level of honesty and vulnerability is how I was able to get a lot done. Because again, folks don't want to admit, look, I don't know what I'm talking about on this issue. I don't know anything about HR. I don't know anything about DEI. I don't know anything about culture change. I don't know anything about this stuff. And I get paid a lot of money to have all the answers all the time.
Right.
So if I could just tell them, like, look, I'm your safe space to not know what the beep, beep, beep is going on. Let's talk. Me and you going to have our touch bases. In the meantime, in between time, we need to be working on this over here. That helped a lot because people don't have spaces to be vulnerable. And being dynamic requires vulnerability. It requires space to say, I don't know what's going on. I'm confused. I'm hurt. I'm lonely. I'm upset. And Fredo, it's funny because Fredo and Michael, neither one of them really had that space. But I think that Michael leveraged that lack of space to push deeper into his purpose, whereas Fredo used that lack of vulnerability and honesty to push deeper into selfishness. And if we even bring in parts of Godfather 3, it really led to both of their demise. Fredo in Godfather 2 and Michael in Godfather 3.
I had a conversation with my best friend a few weeks back, and he made a comment that I believe a lot of people would agree with. They would rock with this comment. The comment was around legendary leaders
Mm.
all have to have the ability to disassociate. So he talked about disassociation disorder. Okay. Now, I disagree with him adamantly about it. And I said, the problem is we believe in order for leaders to be successful, they have to possess this disassociation. Speaking from experience, when you
Mm-hmm.
deal with a lot of unresolved trauma, survival mechanism is to disassociate. The failure is we believe that's what's required in order to be an effective leader versus the leader getting help with the trauma so they can be present and not disassociate.
Mm.
Fredo and Michael both disassociated. It showed up or manifested differently, but it led to both of their demises because they did not address the underlying or the root cause issues that they were hiding from. And
Not you in my
leaders,
business. Wait a minute. Oh no. Go ahead.
and leaders, this is back to the space of transparency and vulnerability. We have to be able to look in the mirror and really face the music, face the noise, face the sounds in our head, and really address that in order for us to be effective in our leadership role. And until
Mm.
leaders are truly willing to do that, nothing is going to change. It will lead to not only the leader's demise, but to the family's demise. What happens when a broken person becomes a parent? They're then a broken parent,
Mm.
and that brokenness replicates. We talk about this, quick plug for my business, but our approach, we call it the big idea, and
Mm.
it's 4 steps. The big idea, the first step is to reimagine. We have to first be willing to reimagine a new future, which means you have to take inventory of what is currently present and what is not working,
Yeah.
and be courageous enough to chart a new course mentally. So, reimagine. Phase 2, or step 2, is to aspire. Simply put, aspiration is to align actions to the newly formed thoughts.
Mm.
This is where change starts to happen. All right. So you
Yes.
start doing. Step 3 is transformation. So we say we don't do to do, we do to become. So you started in aspiring to doing, but you do it consistently and you commit until you transform and become something different. So that's the being stage. Now, a lot of people would think that's the end, but that's just the beginning, because step 4 is now create.
Wow.
Revisiting all of this, the big idea, or creating the big idea. I believe if you don't reimagine, aspire, and transform, all you can do is replicate brokenness.
Yes.
So I refuse to replicate brokenness. So as a leader, I have an obligation to be transformed. So everything I create is now created from a space of wholeness.
Wow.
If I am disassociating, that notion says there's a brokenness that I'm carrying. Therefore, everything I birth, everything I produce is inherently broken.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
refuse to perpetuate broken cycles. Again, the 4x4, for previous, for post generations. At some point, somebody has to raise their hand and say, I'm the person who's going to break this, stop this cycle, chart a new course. And that's what both Fredo and Michael were lacking in The Godfather. And we saw it lead to their demise. But how many leaders that we see current day in our lives
Yep.
operate
Yep.
like a Fredo or a Michael?
Yeah. Because both of them had good and bad side. Yes. And so it's not be a Michael versus being a Fredo or vice versa. Is how can you extract the positive qualities to then create a reality that balances both sides? Because you do need aspects of both.
For sure.
All right, that is a lot to process, and I love that 4-step system around the big idea. One, because I think it helps people to attach themselves to actionable steps that they could be taking and to check back to see their progress. So if we think about the big idea, we talked about Fredo having gifts that went really unappreciated, perhaps even by him, but definitely by others. One of his gifts and talents was how to leverage feigned humility in order to disarm enemies. So again, we talked about how folks didn't suspect that Fredo would be shady because it's like, oh, it's just Fredo. He ain't on nothing. How could Michael, number one, have used that for good versus rejecting Fredo completely?
Great question. First, Michael was comfortable at who he dealt with. Michael valued logic based people,
Mm.
and the people that were closest to him, they responded in logic. When Michael was presented situations that seemed illogical, Michael would shut down. So the first step is for Michael to have developed greater comfort in interacting with others that did not pursue, think, act, respond like he responded.
Yeah. Yes.
The second piece of it is this feigned humility. That one stung me when I read it, when I heard it, because it's an insincere humility, right?
Mm.
It's fake. When I go back to previous life, one of the most dangerous people is a scared person.
Right. Come on.
They're dangerous. They're the
Yeah.
ones that will pull the trigger, right? They're the ones that will be quick. And we've seen that in so many instances in our last 10 years,
Yes.
if you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
Scary people that are in
Yes.
power are the most dangerous people because their fear will cause them to cause irrevocable harm to others because of
Yes.
their insecurity. So
Teach.
that stings me a little bit, but how could Michael use Fredo's, feigned humility and leverage to disarm his enemies? We saw it. We saw the ability for Fredo to penetrate rooms and areas that Michael was unable to penetrate or get access to, or
Mm.
really hear the true intent of these individuals and his enemies.
Mhm.
He could have leveraged Fredo's personality, the unassuming, joking, friendly banter that Fredo provided to
Mhm.
get insight in areas and rooms that he was not welcome into.
Mm.
But that would have
And it's
caused
funny. No, go ahead. I got a thought about that because that just triggered like 3 thoughts. Go ahead.
that would have caused Michael to get comfortable in his discomfort.
Mm.
Come on in.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you said that about him being uncomfortable with illogical thoughts, I'm thinking about even with his argument with Kay, where she was like, "Dude, like, I ended this last pregnancy because I don't want to bring it into this dysfunction." And his thing was like, "What? Like, how could you, right?" And it's like, duh, of course she would, man. You done told her like 12 years ago that you was gonna end all this foolishness. You ain't did it yet. Like, duh, she don't want her kids getting, all that. Are you nuts? But in his mind, it's like, well, yeah, that's just the cost of doing business. Like, I'm figuring it out. And so even with Fredo, for him, because it seems so illogical to him for someone to be that mad about not being in charge. And I think that he underestimated how intense that emotion was because he never wanted to be in charge. He was never groomed to be in charge. Again, he was groomed to be in a whole other type of life. So it's like for him, if I'm in charge or not, oh well. But since now you putting me in a position, I'm gonna make sure I'm ready and do a good job, right? But couldn't respect the other side of that, which is that no, this is not okay. The second thing that came to mind when you said that is the fact that for Michael, the idea that Fredo would prioritize a role or a title over a role that felt unfathomable and unforgivable. And similarly, it happened with Tom Hagen and being the consigliere. Um, it happened with Kay, where it's like, but you're my wife though. Like, I need you to be here and be my partner. How could you prioritize me, being a politician or me, having these titles and not in this family or not the head of this mob over being my wife? Like, what, that doesn't make sense to me. And I think it goes back to what you said about who versus what. The weight of the what eventually destroyed Michael's ability to be a who.
Mm.
Because when you focus so much on
Ooh.
yeah, yeah.
Ah, that's how you feeling.
Because and this is something that I like really struggle with. I'm getting better now, but I mean, I have had to do some intentional, intense work on this because we learn to thrive in dysfunction, and that becomes a badge of honor. So when you have to be the person that can never feel, you can't cry at funerals, you can't show emotion, you can't be upset, you can't grieve, you can't hurt, you can't celebrate for real. Like even as far as celebrate, like the man, everybody else drinking champagne, he drinking water, right? You know what I mean? Like at most he gonna smoke a square. Like other than that, Michael ain't got no vices. He just go to work. And when you don't allow yourself to be fully human, that has major consequences. I call it embracing the totality of your humanity.
I love it.
And yeah, so for at least the last 10 years, I have been intentional about, even if it's a small step, but taking steps to embrace the totality of my humanity, that I get to be a human and experience the range of emotions, that I get to develop the range of logical perspectives and skills that are needed to thrive, that I get to develop all the different parts and levels of emotional intelligence, that I get to be resilient, but then I also get to fall apart sometimes. But sometimes you need to do that a little bit, right? Like all of the things that make me human, I don't think that we appreciate the work that it takes to be fully human. And a lot of us are suffering and struggling because of that.
You
Yeah.
you said a lot there, and there's a lot that we can unpack. I would say we don't thrive in our dysfunction.
Mm,
At best, we survive in it,
mm,
but we survive with a vibrato because the
mm.
louder we are in surviving, the more we try to fool people to think we're thriving. But in all truth, we're miserable. So I have a lot of things in fours. I get revelations in fours. So I'm going to give the big
Yeah.
ideas four. I'm going to give you another four.
Yeah.
There are four stages in life:
Yeah.
existing, stage one;
Yeah.
surviving,
Mm,
stage two; living, stage three; and thriving, stage four.
mm.
The problem with people that look like us, far often than not, we grow up in the bottom two stages of life, either
Yes.
existing
Yes.
or surviving. And although it's four stages, the separation between surviving and living is like the Grand Canyon. The unfortunate
Yes.
thing is we confuse life in the space of existing and surviving when we have never started living.
Yes.
Poverty is rooted in existing and surviving.
Yes, it is. Teach.
Fredo, even though he came from a wealthy family, Fredo in his mind was in prison because he was only existing and surviving. Because in
Mm.
his mind, the only way that he could live is if he was appointed the head of the family because that was his birthright.
Yes. Teach. Yes.
So you can be in a space where on the outside it looks like you're living or thriving, but you're mentally enslaved where all you can do is existing and surviving. The
Mm.
issue is we have far too many leaders, heads of, that are operating in a space of existing or survival.
Mm.
And someone that's surviving can't teach someone how to thrive.
Okay. It's a lot happening in here right now. That just
For sure.
that did something. Okay, here we go. On that note, final thought. The rejection that Fredo experienced from Michael, which felt like the rejection of the whole family, even though it really was one person, pushed Fredo over the edge and kind of sealed his fate to stay down there in that existing phase. How can listeners handle the rejection that they might face that feels just as grave and final as Fredo's rejection felt?
Embracing the totality of their humanity.
Mm,
Disappointment is not something that we're spared from. Every individual is going to face. It's not a matter of will we.
mm-hmm.
It's a matter of when we.
Win. Right.
Preparing for the win and being present in the moment and real enough and honest enough to embrace it, but to vocalize it.
Mm,
Brene Brown talks about this shame consciousness. And when you
mm-hmm.
speak on your shame, you speak of the things that hurt you, the rejection, they actually lose power. Fredo needed to lean into that. The outburst that he had in Nevada in the office, where he sat up, he was laying down, he sat up, screamed. That was the conversation that was needed to be had decades earlier so they
A
could have
long time
worked
ago.
through that.
Yes.
But because he held it in, that then led to this volatile acting and plotting against his very brother and the
Mm,
family itself.
mm,
So the 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 mere notion that Fredo didn't express and deal with the rejection led to his demise. So the
mm,
lesson to leaders are lean into the rejection, lean into the failure, lean
mm,
into the feelings, embrace the totality of our humanity
mm-hmm.
so we can then seek help from those closest to us to help us navigate out of that space.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting book, and again, because we've interjected so many different things, I'll say Tim Grover talks about the notion of being a cleaner.
Mm,
The irony of being a cleaner, which is like the ultimate leader, cleaners have to be willing to get dirty.
yeah.
So when we think about embracing the totality of humanity, that's dirty.
Yeah.
Rejection is dirty. Like who wants to be rejected? But the fact of the matter is we've all been rejected in something.
Mm-hmm.
Are you strong enough, resilient enough to look that rejection in the face, to address the rejection and to move on, overcoming it? My closing thought will be fear and courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. That's delusionment.
Mm,
You're delusional if you can't sense fear. Courage is actually the acknowledgement of fear and a conscious decision to then face and overcome that fear. So, as leaders, we have to be courageous enough to face the rejection, to face the fears, to
mm,
look them square in the face and make a decision that we will not bow, or this is not the end of our story. This is merely a moment in time. My good friend that you met, Brian Taylor, he says the failure is taking a moment in time and making
mm.
it a timeless moment.
Wow. Wow. Oh, on that note, like there's nothing else that I can add. This is a conversation I know I'm gonna be chewing on for a while. I'm so happy that this is the parting thought, especially that it's happening in December, because I think that it gives people some very important things to reflect on as we close out 2024 and start 2025. Let us know in the comments. You probably got 100 thoughts that's running
Right.
in your head as you listen to this conversation, y'all. So let us know in the comments what stood out the most for you. Do you agree with Fredo? Do you disagree with Fredo's actions, perspectives? And look, let us know, are you the Fredo of the family? Are you the Michael of the family? Don't be ashamed, be yourself. But let us know down in the
Oh,
comments. And of course, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Get ready for season 4. The first episode drops in January, and I will catch you all soon. Bye.